Good afternoon, everyone. I am welcome to the Initiative for Agency and Development, IfAD, Public Talk Series. And today we are honored to have Dr. Rabah Arezki. Rabah is currently the Senior Fellow at Kennedy School of Government, Harvard. And immediately before, he was the Chief Economist and Vice President of African Development Bank Group. Before that, he was chief economist for Middle East and North Africa region of World Bank. Before that, he was head of commodities and environment at International Monetary Fund. So Rabah is a macroeconomist, a macro development economist. His range of research is huge, but in particular, what I like about and admire about his work and his scholarship is he's one of the few economists who are serious, who have a tremendous impact, not only in terms of research and government policy, but he is simultaneously, he has been one of the most productive researchers and as well as policymakers. Rabah is also a very effective translator of economics. And so his work frequently is cited in New York Times, Economist, Le Monde. He is frequent contributor to various outlets, including Project Syndicates, Vox. So he is today, it is without exaggeration, he is one of the most influential economic voice on international stage, particularly in Middle East and Africa region. So it is really a great pleasure to have Rabah today, and he is joining us from Paris. It is his supposed to be family time, but he's here. So he's going to talk about Coup and its economic and political impact. So Rabah will welcome and thank you for doing it. He will talk for 30 to 40 minutes, and after that, we will have a question answer session for 30 minutes. Just for logistic, please keep your question for the end. And once you have a question, you just use the feature of Zoom to raise your hand, and I'll call your name and you can directly ask the question to Rabah. So with that, Rabah, welcome, and now the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this absolutely too generous an introduction, and thank you for your friendship and the kind invitation. Delighted to meet you all, albeit virtually. So today the talk is going to be trying and make sense of the recent wave of coup in Africa, and try and put it in perspective with the changing world we are witnessing before our eyes. So the coup wave in Western and Central Africa included Chad, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and there were also a couple of attempted coups, including in Guinea-Bissau. This wave of coup contrasts with the wave of democratization in the late 1980s. And this wave of democratization was seen as the third wave of democratization. It was seen as basically the end of history, the wave with which we will arrive to full democratization of the developing world. And here we go again, 40 years after, and we have that wave of coup, a major reversal, at least in this set of countries. But there are indications that other leaders in Africa and elsewhere are basically now, denigrating democracy and trying to reverse it in various ways. So put this presentation in the context of a doubtful future of democratization, at least in the developing world. But as you well know, the future of democracy is also at stake in many advanced economy where populism is on the rise. So in retrospect, the push for democratization could be seen as very superficial because We are now, we see the international community condemning the state of coup. So having pushed this democratization without really having an integrated approach that really integrate both democratization and economic development, really, I think, is the root cause of that major reversal in democratization. This is the list. I won't go in lots of detail, and I'm happy to talk about these specific cases, but all of these cases of coup are all, of course, peculiar, but they all have elements of both internal dynamics and external dynamics. Take Burkina Faso. The President Kabore, who was hosted by essentially the army, was a second-time president. He was just freshly re-elected, democratically, and he had attempted in his first mandate during his early days. He had attempted to clean up the army, remove a number of generals, and this seemed to have backfired. And of course, there was important accusation of corruption, including in military contracts, and the army seemed to have really taken root now, and it is a very, very worrisome situation in terms of the future of democracy in Burkina Faso. In Guinea-Conakry, President Alpha Condé attempted to amend the constitution to run for an additional mandate. He was ousted in a military coup as well, and there was also important criticism about his track record in terms of economic security outcome, concern about terrorism. Security is rampant, and of course issues of at least the perception of widespread corruption was also an issue. Worse is Guinea-Bissau, even so it's an attempted coup. I wanted to discuss it here. It seems that Guinea-Bissau has become one of the major conduit with which Latin American drug trafficking transit through West Africa all the way up north to its final destination, Europe. So they seem to be, element of the army fighting against one another for controlling the cocaine trafficking. In Chad, Idriss Déby, the longtime president, himself a military ruler, was killed in combat, and his son took over. Of course, now the various factions disagree, and Qatar is trying to find a mediation route, but it seems difficult. Mali is also another interesting case where the demise of Muammar Gaddafi led to an external shock which has destabilized a country, the Sahel region, including Mali, that really led to the northern rebel, if you wish, independentist group, basically converging on the capital Bamako, and essentially the rulers at the time called upon the French army to support them. A while after now, the French troops are no longer welcome. They are asked to leave. New set of military coup happened, and the regional economic community of West Africa try and sanction Mali, and the military ruler wouldn't budge on the timing of the next election, which is, I think, now set to 3 years, but it used to be 4 or 5. And so they wouldn't budge on that. They're under heavy criticism, but they have chosen to now also ally with the Russian, to the Russian militia, named as Wagner. So it's an interesting case, and it shows also the variety of situation. But this talk is also based on a paper we're putting together where we are more systematic than just looking at Africa. And this graph shows you the evolution of the number of coups, the cumulative number of coups, and you could see the top line is Sub-Saharan Africa, SSA, then followed by Latin America. But you see the plateau somewhat after the independence. The number of coups increased rapidly, then plateau in most countries, and you know, Sub-Saharan Africa is definitively the region that has the most that I witnessed in the past decade the most important number of coups, while Latin America has also had a set of coups, including in the 80s, but has plateaued since then. One exercise we do in the paper one is to try and benchmark the effect, the consequences of coup against the consequences of foreign invasion. And here we plot the evolution of the number of foreign invasion or international military intervention in different regions. And there too, we see Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East and North Africa, MNA, Asia Pacific. So we have a number of cases that I would like to take you through, where we're trying to make the case that there are something fundamentally different about the coup, which are originating from lots of internal dynamics, albeit external shocks are also important. Foreign invasion could be seen as somewhat more exogenous in some way, even so there are elements of vulnerability that comes into play. But let me let me try and make sense of all these cases by broadly saying that coups are driven by a myriad of factors, including external, internal ones. We've seen it in the case of Sahel, of Mali, where the intervention of NATO in Libya was a clear source of spillover into Mali and reverberate on the situation till today. Cocaine trafficking from Latin America, through West Africa is also certainly an external factor that also had some role. The military bases, foreign military bases, the influence of foreign colonial power, which is vanishing. The importance of the rising importance of China, the debt, so-called debt trap, and also a number of other actors. So these factors are at play. They are important, but there are of course internal factors. And in these cases, we also saw that the growing frustration of the population, which is increasingly aware also of the poorer standard of living compared to other countries through social media. And the fact that these civilian governments didn't seem to deliver on economic development, on corruption, on governance more broadly, has certainly also played a critical role. And here the focus is really going beyond the causes of coup, but looking more at their consequences. But before I get to that, I also wanted to illustrate these cases with the map on the left-hand side of this so-called trans-Saharan migration routes. These routes show that even prior to the Libyan conflict, they were important trade routes, and they also involve movement of population. So following the intervention, the military intervention in Libya, there were lots of smuggling of weapons that took place, which has contributed to destabilize the Sahelian part. composed of Niger, Mali, and many others. On the right hand side, you see the cocaine drug trafficking routes transiting through West Africa on its way to Europe. The same way, Mexico, others could be a transit route for drug to North America. So clearly these are important factors. And when it comes to military bases, Africa is becoming an important area where lots of regional and major superpower compete for influence. They compete, there's the traditional former colonial power like France, the UK, but there are new ones. Of course, the US is also there. There's also new ones: Turkey, Israel, UAE, and of course China. So this is becoming important, and a lot of attention has been paid to the importance of the growing importance of China on economic terms. Lots of the debt held by African countries is owed to China. But what is worrisome, including for the U.S. Military and U.S. government more generally, is that China seems to have involvement in major ports, major electricity plant all around the continent, and that has been slow building, but very important. So this coup, are happening in the context where the world order is being shaken. There is a growing rivalry between the U.S. And China, and similarly, the fall of USSR, the Soviet Union, the early 1990s, clearly also led or contributed to that wave of democratization. Here we are on the verge of seeing not the end of the Cold War, but beginning of a new one, which could contribute to more of this, reversal of democratization in the form of coup. So now let me go to a more narrow, I would say, rather more academic part of the presentation, where I'm trying to, with my co-author, I forgot to mention, Suleiman, not sure he's connected, but he's done all the work, so should have introduced him. So what we're trying to do is to try and ascertain the independent effect of military coup, not the causes, but rather understand what coup yield in terms of economics and politics. This is challenging because clearly, as I showed, there's lots of factors at play, and including structural deficiencies on many fronts. And but when thinking about and we will address that, but in thinking about the impact of coup, one could easily see that obviously mechanically this coup will inexorably break the dynamic of democratization or reverse democratization, and military could cling on to power and have a persistent effect. That's obvious. But on the economic front, clearly also, military men are not necessarily very good at managing the economy, and they are often subjected to very important sanctions by the international community, which is very bad for business. And but one could also argue that military men and perhaps women are important, much more disciplined, and possibly could bring a bit more, control of corruption. So, we asked the question as to whether they deliver on that front, and whether also, most importantly, as military, whether they deliver on security. Is there a reduction in terrorism? So those are the kind of questions we want to answer. And to do that, we also complement the analysis with trying to benchmark the effect of coup with foreign invasion. We see it with Ukraine. So Ukraine is clearly fighting, with of course, the help of the international community, is fighting Russia, and this is a moment of coming together. Obviously, there's lots of destruction, loss of lives, but obviously this may end and lead to a coming together, a stronger democracy, a stronger control of corruption. And so while, in contrast to coup that are somewhat, less, exogenous in nature, foreign invasion could lead to rallying around the flag effect, where, while the effect in the short run is negative, it could be reversed, or it could improve over the medium run on many more fronts than in the case of coup. And so to do that from an econometric standpoint, we use a dynamic approach. We look at outcomes such as economic and political one. We look at security outcomes, governance outcomes, and try and find understand the channel. And we use a method called heterogeneity, robust difference and difference. And this is allowing us to build counterfactual and try and address the structural deficiency that pre-exist to the coup. And then, of course, as I mentioned, benchmark the effect with the foreign invasion. Interestingly, for those who are keen on econometrics, we also have a case of non-staggered coup, if you wish, in the sense that the red dot here, this is a list of countries we have in our sample, and the red dot constitute the events, the treatment, the coup, and you could see that this is countries elect to be coup or not, and then get out, and then get treated again. So the technique we use account for that building counterfactual. This is just a summary of the potential or the expected effect. So clearly there's a difference. We anticipate a difference in terms of persistent the effect of coup on democracy, on economy, on security, on the control of corruption, albeit, as we said, maybe it's positive in the case of security. Coup brings more security, and it may be persistent, and maybe they control more corruption. So this is an empirical question we're trying to get an answer for. For foreign invasion, it's all going to be in the perhaps the non-persistence of the effect, and so they're clearly negative on many fronts as a result of the foreign invasion. These are the graphical illustration of the result for both the main outcomes that we look at, democracy and income, so economic, political and economic. And clearly what this shows is the dynamic of the effect of coup, and it shows that clearly on both fronts, on the democracy front and on income, coup have unambiguously and statistically significant effects, and I would say even economically significant effect in the deterioration of democracy and income. When comparing that to the effect of foreign invasion, the consequences, the dynamic consequences, clearly, as we anticipated, there is much less persistence in the effect of foreign invasion on democracy and income, while it stays the same, of course, on the left-hand side for the effect of coup. So clearly, foreign invasion do yield much less persistent negative outcome on democracy and income. So, but another question we try and answer is whether a coup leader deliver on issues of security, on issues of governance. So while we don't have a significant effect on the number of deaths through terrorist attack, it doesn't significantly decline. So while military coup leader often advertise their the fact that they will take over and solve the issue of terrorism that has caused uproar and led to the coup. They, at least empirically, don't seem to deliver much on the terrorism front. On governance, there's up and down, but not as significant as one would have hoped. At least when leaders come to powers, they often insist on anti-corruption agenda, but seems not rooted in the data. On employment, it's clearly negative. On productivity as well. So not many things that coup leader on average can brag about. And now we try and go further and try and inspect the channels of why is it so persistent? Why do coup have such a persistent effect on this economic and political outcome, and mostly on the economic front here? We suspect that sanction imposed by the international community may have something to do with that. So we do test formally with the effect, by looking at various sanctions. And then, as we know, many instances, the IMF almost mechanically stops any financing, and all the all the other international financial institutions also follow suit and only come back when the IMF has came back to the table. And this depends on whether the authorities are recognized. And so here, this is the effect of coup on the different type of sanctions. So very clearly, we see persistent in financial sanction, which I believe could be at the macro level the most relevant here, and some element of persistence of the effect of coup on trade as well. Our premise is that the effect of persistence, at least on the economic aspect, is may have to do with the at least the importance of sanction. But of course, there are also other factors that can play out, and here we document the persistent loss in investment, which is also echoed by the evolution of the capital stock. And of course, given the uncertainty, the loss of income, consumption also declines. When trying to unpack the reason behind the drop in, or at least the immediate aspect related to the political mechanism, we look at the different polity outcome, and we find that executive constraints are also weakened following the coup, and openness to executive recruitment, not a surprise, because mechanically coup do interrupt the democratic process. And as I said, in the case of Mali, clearly they don't intend to even return to election anytime soon, and they drag their feet, maybe for fear of retaliation as well. So I'm going to end by stating the most important result. So clearly, coup do have persistent effect both on political and economic outcome. Some of the economic persistent effect may have to do with the importance of sanction that are imposed on coup leader. Coup leader don't seem to deliver, and it is important to go beyond the mere push on democratization and consider issues of the economy. But I will leave you with the fact that we are in a very tumultuous geopolitical era where there are important rivalries between the US and China. This may amount to a new Cold War, and the new Cold War, if you look at history, led to important also reversal of democratization. So the paper has tried to address the issue of what would be the consequences of this increasing number of coups. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Rabah. This is very good, and there are a lot of results, and thank you for not going into econometric details, because we have a lot of students here also. So anyone, so let's open the room for question and answer. So anyone who has a question, please unmute yourself and you can ask directly. Melia, go ahead.
Hi. So I was wondering, in the last slide, it mentioned that almost all of the recent coups have been in French-speaking African countries within West Africa. Do you think that's because of the fact that France decolonized in a much less substantial way back in the 60s? Like the West African countries that are French influenced, they still use French economic systems. They were under the French currency before the euro came about. They were much more controlled. Do you think that that kind of neo-colonialism that France maintained is the cause of their relative lack of stability relative to English-speaking countries?
So my explanation is more of the fact that I mean, obviously let me add that there were lots of coups in English speaking Africa in the past. So the recent wave is indeed clearly as clearly not involve any English speaking country. So my explanation had more to do with the fact that it seems to be that English-speaking countries seems to have more of a parliamentary type of system. French-speaking a more parliamentary presidential system, and presidential system may be less subject to what I call this kind of real-time accountability. In parliamentary system, you can be hosted if you don't deliver. So it could well be that some element of that is at play. I haven't looked at that closely, but we are at the beginning of this new wave of coup. It is not clear that English-speaking countries are doing that much better, at least in economic term. But we, of course, have an interesting case in the case of Ghana, because Ghana is I would say a thriving democracy in West Africa, and a very dynamic parliament. Two important parties going head to head in parliament. Sometimes it's fist fight, but it is still in parliament. So and interestingly, there was an important leader, a coup leader, Jerry Rawlings, who passed a few years ago, and he was seen as the one who kind of imposed, if you wish, that kind of anti-corruption drive, and really kind of instilled that rule of election and respect for mandates. And so, interestingly, there was a coup, and it seemed to have installed democracy in some way, and he's still regarded till today as so he was a coup leader. Then he got elected and relinquished power. He is regarded as having really been some kind of the father of that maturing democracy in Ghana. So very complex, issues to grapple with when it comes to understanding different countries.
That's very good. And who is next?
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Augustine Fosu.
Augustine
Rabah,
Fosu.
it's a pleasure to listen to you. A real pleasure, right? Yes, this is very nice, really nice. I just have a very small, minor question, and that is: let us suppose that a given country is doing very badly economically, a lot of uncertainty and all that kind of stuff. Might a successful coup be advisable?
Sorry, Augustine, it's very nice to see you.
It's a pleasure.
Been a mentor to me. I really
thank you.
I miss our interaction, but
I do too.
No, I don't think I understood the beginning of the. So you said if a country is not doing too well, would you advise a coup? I mean, clearly from the result I'm showing, coup leaders don't seem to deliver that well. But of course, the late Jerry Rawlings makes me doubt, but sometimes there are instances where this coup do set a new path. But at least on average here, both on security, on governance issues, they don't seem to deliver. And
for example, let's think about Egypt. Let's think about Egypt. Things went a big mess, as I recall, when Morsi was in power. That was quite democratic, and it took al-Sisi to come in, as I recall, to restore order. And it seems as if things economically have improved in Egypt.
Yeah,
as a possible example. Am I totally wrong?
No. So of course, there are very serious human rights abuses happening now in Egypt, and I think the U.S. government has withheld its aid in order for the Egyptian government to try and solve that issue. So I would say that yes, indeed, there was an impressive set of reform, macroeconomic reform, but much less on the micro, if you wish, on the structural front, where we know that the army has very strong interest in the economy. So Sisi has done very little, and of course now we feel at least. The Egyptians do feel the fact that these macroeconomic stabilization policy have helped, but they haven't really boosted growth durably. They've been borrowing a lot, and now they are at risk with this food crisis. So and on human rights front, it's absolutely a disaster. And I wouldn't look at military involvement in Egypt as a success from that perspective.
All right, but I would like to get a copy of your paper. Thanks, Rabah.
So go ahead. That's great. Tyler, unmute and ask question.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Arezki. So my question was about so we showed earlier with the charts of sub-Saharan Africa and with Latin American countries that there's been a steady decline in a plateau for Latin American countries compared to that of sub-Saharan, which has been more consistent and has still been on an incline. What I was going to ask was whether, even though we still see countries like Guinea-Bissau who are influencing drug trafficking and cocaine trafficking to Latin American countries than to Europe, if the problem and the inconsistency with what's happening in Latin America and with sub-Saharan Africa is caused by a distrust in the military, more so than drug trafficking itself, seeing how both countries are involved with drug trafficking to Europe and other parts of the world.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me try to give you an answer, and then you correct me if that was not the answer you were waiting for. So in the case of Latin America, indeed we see a plateau in the number of coups. Whether Latin American countries have been somewhat more successful than African countries, Augustin would be better place to answer that. But and then maybe the precondition, the pre-existing condition for coups were less present, and that could explain that plateau. In terms of on the drug trafficking front, again, Guinea-Bissau is actually an attempted coup, not successful, if you wish. But it seems many other countries in West Africa are subjected to that drug trafficking, and it is very worrisome, especially when you've got corruption in government, in the military. But when looking at the data on trust in military, it seems, at least on Africa, according to Afrobarometer, that there is quite a bit of trust vis-a-vis the army. Africans don't really look down on the army. They do respect the army, but they clearly don't want the army to take over and to rule. So there seems to be a very mature mindset in Africa about the separation between the military and politics, and they appreciate it, they understand it's vitally important, they don't really support them getting involved in politics. And I'm not too sure about the data on Latin America. We could look at the various surveys as well, and see whether this is similar.
That's very good.
Thank you so much.
So Haley, you are next. You unmute and you ask.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for that talk. That was very educational. But I had a quick question about the January 6th like event that happened in 2021, I believe it was. Would you consider that a attempted coup d'etat, or does it have to like reach all of the points of requirement to be considered one or be considered a siege?
Oh yeah, to be frank, I mean, personally, I would consider it a coup d'etat. Whether in the definition of the database that we use, this is there. It would be actually an awkward moment to have a country like the US enter the database, and a very unfortunate moment for the US. But I guess it does have element of being a coup, whether it's attempted coup. Of course, a coup would have to be successful, and clearly we are only considering successful coup here, so we haven't introduced that, but definitively has the attribute of a coup. But the strict definition, I would have to revert back to you on what the database we use. Whether it's a siege or coup, I'm not sure where they draw the line.
Okay, and just like to follow up, if that's okay, like, so you know how like the whole thing, it was like different people had different goals of that attempt. Does the entire group have to have like one purpose that's like the same one for it to be considered an attempt, or can it be like varied?
The answer is I don't know, and here clearly what makes it I think more likely to be a relevant event and potential attempted coup is the fact that it attacked the capital, a very bastion, very institution that is the beacon of democracy. So I mean, I really have to go back to the database and see what the actual definition is. But then I'm sure political scientists will have a lot to say about how you define attempted coup in rigorous way.
Thank you so much.
So Rabah, I have a series of questions and just for further discussion and clarification. So one thing I wanted to understand, what was your motivation behind making a distinction between coup and foreign invasion? And that what was your underlying rationale, that in what fundamental way foreign invasion is somehow different than coup for the outcomes you consider, for example, for short-term as well as persistent effect of development, democratization, and other stuff. So that was first question. Second one related to that is, I may be wrong, you correct me, that rarely coup has happened without a foreign power being involved internally, externally. So like, for example, if you look at most of the coup in Latin American countries or African countries, you will see that there is always a foreign power, a stronger power that they have an ally, and that is what it happened. Pakistan is a good example. That every time coup happened in Pakistan, it was during the Cold War. You could see that it was US was behind. So that was so because of that, so that is one thing. Second, the third part was in terms of when you look at the results, the mechanisms you are talking about, that it is one thing to have the average effect of coup compared to effect of foreign invasion. But within each category, do you see any heterogeneous result? For example, if coup is locally driven because of persistent grievances, unrest, dissatisfaction with the democratic institution or political leadership, do you see that if it is more organically grown, and as Dr. Augustine was basically alluding to that when you see that there is a discontent and it has been building up, and then the military comes in and steps in, are those coup leaders they are arguably have more legitimacy, even though they are not democratic, but are they able to deliver more than the coup leaders who are just imposed from outside? Yeah.
Should I go?
Yeah.
So let me take the last question first. So the answer to your question is we don't know, because the very need for us to identify the shock, if you wish, of coup force us to try and clean up the shock from anything that would taint it. So in a sense, we could try and distinguish coups and try and test for the heterogeneity. But what we do with the difference in different approach was to try exactly address some of these pre-existing deficiencies and try and ascertain more exogenous source of variation, if you wish. So in a sense, we can test for it, but I'm not sure if splitting the data further and parsing it would help with trying to give you a causal relationship better. So I would like to think more about the implication for the econometric identification that we are attempting to do, and the necessarily need for the quest to causality. Yet, I think the more conceptual question you were asking before about the distinction between coup and foreign invasion. Here, the idea is to say, coup are a different animal because they are indeed more organic. They have elements of internal dynamic at play, and so I showed that the external factors can play a role. Here, the question was to try and look at that and not think too much about the causes, but rather the consequences with that identification strategy that I showed. So, so while we are confident we've built a counterfactual and isolate that causal relationship, we also wanted to just add a comparison between that animal of kind of more homegrown, if you wish, with the foreign invasion, which is more obviously by definition an attack or an invasion coming from abroad, and see whether dynamically we yield different. They are both negative. Shock, but whether there was differences in the persistence, in the dynamic effect. So of course, the invasion of Ukraine also made us think about what about if we, through our econometrics, we can compare the effect of coup, in the set of coup we've seen in Africa with the consequences of a war, an invasion that we've seen in the case of Ukraine. So this was really just as a way to illustrate further potential differences, and then we try to unpack the channel. But essentially, there was just an additional set of results that would have allowed us to understand the effect of coup and their persistence in comparison to a different animal, a different shock altogether. And then in terms of foreign involvement in coup, yeah, surely. I mean, that's, I think, the role of the CIA and all this is well documented in many instances. We surely don't have. I mean, didn't take this into account, but I mean that would take another paper to try and look specifically at again whether there is heterogeneity in the case of a foreign-driven coup where we have evidence of involvement of CIA or any other foreign intelligence services. Yeah, it's an interesting question, not for this paper, but surely that can be done if we have the data on CIA / foreign foreign intelligence service involvement in coup and just test the heterogeneity. I think that can be done.
and to follow up, thank you for that. So Rabah, to follow up, have you considered other outcomes? So for example, you are looking at income and democratic institutions. So the reason why I was asked other outcomes, for example, is does the allocation of fiscal budget changes in a meaningful way after the coup? Why this is, I'm asking, is that related to my previous question about whether coup is internally driven, that it is building up for social discontent or ethnic discontent division. There is a polarization going on. And most coup, particularly in African and Latin American countries, you will see that there is a, not just, if you just concentrate on inequality part, the inequality is polarized along ethnic dimension. So it is not just about gap between rich and poor or rural area or urban area. Also, there is a concentration. It is the one group dominates another group, both in economic spheres as well as a political sphere. For example, you see Burundi, you are quite familiar with, they have two ethnic minority community was basically in power. And so what I am trying to get it is that it is it is clearly that if you see that whether it is coup or foreign invasion, in the short run, it is not hard to see that there will be economic impact, negative economic impact. The question is how persistent. Now, no matter how good a coup is, good or bad, can you see a scenario where a coup could be beneficial for economic growth? And why it would be the case when, why would you think that a coup may have other than but negative effect? And so one thing I was thinking about was along this line is that it may be that income is just easily you can see that of course this will have negative impact, and interesting aspect is whether it is how long it persists. But even from my point of view, more interesting is that if it is a coup, it is about not necessarily growth, because political stability is disrupted, institutions are disrupted, but is the allocation of resources changing in a meaningful way? For example, let's say expenditure on education, health, military. Is it the share of expenditure on military goes up? Or if it is organically driven, is some of the coups respond to the political considerations and particular stakeholders? So I will be more interesting to see that a particular coup changes the way, given that you assume that GDP is a constant, and because, or it will be declining, but in a way, their area of allocation of public fund is being different. So that will be very insightful.
No, it's a fair question, and I think an interesting dimension for us to explore in terms of their actual behavior, in terms of the composition of spending. If we have good data on this, that will be certainly interesting. But I must say that there were areas where we looked at the evolution of terrorism, the evolution of governance, and there it was not obvious before we did the test that military is in charge. They are professional, defense people. They should be able to reverse at least or curb, security concern. And we don't find that. And on governance, supposedly, that's also what they also often come about. I mean, they come to the fore because they military are more organized, more supposedly less corrupt. So this was also an area where we could have seen at least some different outcome, less negative, and we didn't. So yes, I agree that public spending composition and its evolution could be an interesting area to see where they put the money they have. And again, I want to insist on the fact that we do find that sanctions play a critical role in explaining the persistence in addition to the drop in GDP, that may or may not really be related to the sanctions. So the sanction may also reduce their ability to spend, but then yes, the compositions could still be an interesting dimension to look at, and we'll do so.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Amin, go ahead, unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Rabah, and it was very interesting lecture. I would like just to say that, did you do any forecasting, like how long it takes, to offset the impact of these coups and to go back on track to democracy? Thank you.
So when you say forecasting, you mean trying to?
But how long it takes the impact of this coup, and then it will go back, to democracy on average.
Yeah. So the graphical illustration of the impulse response are showing the dynamic effect of coup. So you can read the number of years it takes to go back to to the level that we had at the coup, the date of the coup, date zero. So it does take a long time. I mean, according to the impulse response, so it could take. Albeit it's not statistically significant toward the end, it shows that it would take over 5-10 years for this to become. Non-statistically different from zero. So it is a long time, I believe.
So Rabah, to follow up, but that is assuming that you are not accounting for, when you say that, let's say that it recovers, goes back to pre-coup period. So you are not accounting for the lost opportunity cost. So let's say, for example, if the coup happens in 2022 and GDP was growing at a 5%, now coup happened and GDP goes down to 2%, then after 10 years, you are back to 5%. So what you are saying?
Sorry. Yeah, you're correct. So because it's a difference in difference, it is the counterfactual. We're comparing it not to the pre-level.
Okay. So any Keshav? Okay, go ahead quickly.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Can you turn your video on?
Okay. Speaking like I don't really have much insight on international affairs and regarding coup, but I was interested in if there might be any sort of association or relation of a coup and upcoming other consecutive coups, or the chances if there have been a coup, and what might be the relation or association of happening another consecutive coup in the same nation, or the effect of a nation on the effect of a coup on the neighboring nation to the particular nation.
So you have to help me. I didn't really get the.
I think what he is talking about is actually very interesting question. This is something, it may pose econometric challenge. So what he's asking is that is there any path dependence in coup? So if it happens in one country, it is more likely to happen in the same country again, and that there is a path dependence to that. And the second aspect he's asking is regional effect. Spillover effect. So let's say if it happens in Pakistan, does it make more likely that it will happen in Afghanistan and other countries? So that is his main question. But from my point of view, since he asked that question, if that is the case, then when you are doing your empirical analysis, each observation is not independent of each other. So and also there is a grouping going on. So even for standard errors, it will be there could be autocorrelation as well as there could be heteroscedasticity by neighborhood. And that a standard difference in difference won't account for it.
Yeah, no, these are important issues to address. You know, we are addressing issues of heteroscedasticity, and we're really using the state of the art, you know, diff and diff. But whether these are non-staggered events, whether you know, we can test we could test actually for whether a coup in a given country then predict the likelihood of coup. So we could actually test for that, whether it has implication on our result. I will have to think harder. And on the on the issue of spillover between different countries, I actually don't think that the technique we're using is addressing that, but I would have to also discuss with my code and come back. But those are two important econometric issues that we need to address, and we will do so.
Okay, so one last question, 2 minutes. Deborah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for your talk. I had a question about the coups that have happened in Haiti over, since the beginning of the country. And so I have a particular interest in that country. And they've had roughly about 42 coups over the course of their history. And I was just wanting to know what you might add to that, or how you might bring clarity to it.
Yeah, this question is actually intimately related to the previous question, and whether there is element of past dependency, and whether pre-existing condition do lend themselves to the likelihood that there'll be a series of coups. Regarding Haiti, I'm not an expert, but I know that Haiti, of course, has a very complex history, and it seems that this is still reverberating today, but very complex, very challenging, environment, and breaking the this series of coups would require lots of coming together, and it seems that the country is on a path of getting worse, and this is tragic already. The images I have seen are really like literally, mafias having taken over the country, and the state that doesn't seem to have the capacity to deal with that. So it reminds me of debates we've had at the World Bank on the importance of the security sector, on the important function of government to ensure security, and when government cannot deliver on that, I think all bets are off. Things can really go down the drain. So that's all I really can say on this tragic situation.
Okay, so this is unless somebody has a last minute question, it is late, and so let's close it. Thank you, Rabah, for food for thought, for excellent presentation and discussion, and thank you for everyone joining. And as I can tell you that you will meet Rabah in person. He will visit University of Arizona. It is a matter of time, and we will have much more in-person social interaction and conversation with him. So thank you for everyone joining, and Rabah, thank you for doing it, and you have a wonderful evening in Paris, and I'll see you sometime soon.
Thank you, everyone. It was a real pleasure to be with you all. And thank you, Tauhidur, for such a wonderful moderation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.